My guests this week are Jenny Don't and Kelly Halliburton. Jenny Don't earned her moniker in her youth for her strong-willed and independent nature, often defying authority figures much to their consternation. This inherent rebelliousness led her to resonate with the authentic outlaw spirit of country western music. And since forming Jenny Don't and the Spurs, they've been pioneering their own path in music for the last dozen years. Known for their high-energy country western style and captivating stage presence, they've garnered a global following with their infectious enthusiasm and extensive discography, featuring 3 albums, an EP, and 9 singles. Kelly Halliburton began his musical career in the late 80s in Portland, Oregon, joining several bands associated with the anarcho-punk scene, including Resist, Defiance, Depraved, and Detestation. In March 2007, following the disbandment of Dead Moon, Fred and Toody Cole approached Halliburton, offering him the position of drummer in their new project, Pierced Arrows. Despite primarily being a bass player with limited drumming experience, he accepted the offer, and Pierced Arrows released 2 full-length albums and 5 singles. They toured extensively until Fred's health began to decline around 2016. And it was in 2011 that Halliburton and partner Jenny Don't formed the western band Jenny Don't and the Spurs, where they enlisted the legendary drummer Sam Henry, originally of the Wipers. And it is my great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Jenny Don't and Kelly Halliburton. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm so glad to see 2 of my favorite video store customers in front of me today. You know, I miss that.
I do too. It was awesome, like getting off my shift at the pub and just being like, okay, time to see what's going on across the street.
Well, you picked a film that was a big film for the identity of the store, and of course, Portland. The 2004 documentary Unknown Passage: The Dead Moon Story, directed by Kate Fix and Jason Summers. But I wanted to tell you that, ironically, the first country western band I ever saw in my life was the Western Front. Fred and Toody from Dead Moon's country and western band at Satyricon, playing to no one, right? Fred kicked a heckler in the head.
Oh God!
Yeah, and you could hear the boot hit the bone, but it was like the guy just took it, kind of wandered out. It was fine, but I was like, oh wow, like to me, growing up country western, I was synonymous with like, oh, these are people who want to kick my ass. Maybe as you get older, you start listening to outlaw country and all this stuff, and it's super anti-authoritarian. And very, anti-jail, anti-cop. I could see the line between what they did in The Rats and this and Dead Moon. Do you feel that, like what you're doing right now with, Jenny Don't and the Spurs? Do you feel similar lineage?
Sure. I think I had a similar take to yours growing up as a young punk rocker living in the rural Oregon coast town. I grew up in Nehalem, Oregon.
Oh yeah.
And back then, if you were kind of weird or kind of into sort of alternative culture at all, the rednecks were the natural enemy. And closely associated with the rednecks was their music culture, and that was country western. And so it was almost like sort of that 80s movie trope of the hick, the country western hick.
Yes.
It was just violent, and and the Blues Brothers or any of those other movies, it was always kind of the violent redneck, and that was what it was like growing up for me. But I always had I don't know, it took a while. It took until adulthood, I think, for me to start appreciating the nuances of country western, and also its connection to early rock and roll, the early period in the 50s and the early 60s, when it was pretty much the same thing. It was rock and roll. But at some point, I think that in the 60s the rift started and kind of continued to this day to some extent. But I think what we try and do is sort of go back to those days where it was, kind of dangerous rock and roll, and so yes, there's a definite through line from the punk
Yeah.
My punk roots.
Well, I feel like it's still,
this.
yeah, I mean, I feel like it's still similar to, mainstream country has not done country music any, benefits.
Yeah, it's gone backwards again.
Yeah, and it's awful, and it represents all the things that all of us, are totally against or just don't agree with. And it's like, so when we still, like, oh, you play Western music, then you have to have this like long explanation of like, okay, well, country music is blah, 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 blah. And I think people don't totally understand just like the depth of it. If you say like, I'm a rock band, that could mean anything.
Totally.
And that's kind of the same.
Right.
And I think a lot of people, unless you're kind of connected in a music scene of some sort, you don't even realize. I mean, me growing up, you don't even realize there's like this underground current of music that's really good, and that there's a lot of bands really talented and interesting. And I grew up in Acme, Washington. I grew up between Acme, Washington, and Artesia, New Mexico. And in Washington, I was one of the hicks. I used to rodeo. I'm super rural, and I feel like my growing up examples of like punks are kind of like where Kelly's are examples of rednecks. Like there weren't any like punk rock kids at Acme, and if you had any experience with them, it was like Hot Topic or like watching Terminator, and it's like the punks on the movie, like cartoon. Like that. Oh, they're gonna have like tire treads on their face. Cool,
Yeah, they cancel each other out.
Yeah, it wasn't until I got a little bit older when I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that's obviously like a stereotype written by somebody that has no idea what they're. But so I kind of came from the opposite end where I grew up with Western and I grew up with country, and like playing punk rock for me was not quite as natural. So I feel like Kelly and I, it's like a perfect puzzle piece where he introduced me to all of this background, and then I've introduced him to all this background, and I'm like, see, it's not all totally awful, right?
Well, and also your version of country Western is full on. It's like really amazing. I think,
Thanks.
Again, if you just see country Western tonight, yeah, I think going to see you, people have a different interpretation of what they're going to see when they enter the door.
Yeah.
But it's so amazing. Jenny, I don't know when you found out that you could sing like you do. As somebody who has the most reedy, nasally voice myself, I mean, like, how do you, like, did you always have that? Was that a surprise? Or did like, as you moved into like punk and other areas of expression, were you able to kind of find your voice then?
I've always liked singing. I sang in school. I was in like a women's choir in junior high, and I never was interested in being in a band necessarily. I've always liked singing. My parents were in a band, and I was like, oh my God, they dragged me to stuff. And I was like, this is the worst. Like, I'd rather be anywhere here than here, And,
yes.
But I have always really liked music. I've always really connected with music. It's helped me, get through a lot of important pieces. So when I think back in my life, I'm like, oh, music's always been very present. And singing, especially, I used to record myself singing on our answering machine, and I'd play it back, be like,
oh, that's so great.
I'd practice singing to see if I could hit all the notes, and then I'd try to re-record like, thanks for calling, before anybody would call, and I'd be mortified if that kicked in and they'd just hear me belting on the answer machine some random songs, and practicing. I remember I was probably, well, we looked it up the other day to see what year it came out, but like Paula Abdul's, her first hit, I have a memory of practicing that and getting caught. I was busted. My sister walked in and I'm just singing, but I feel like it's taken a lot of encouragement, and luckily I have a good friend group and support group that have pushed me to continue. Like, wow, you should do that, because you're your own worst critic, where I'm like, oh yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I can sing, but I'm not gonna.
Right.
And Kelly's the best. He's like, get out there. What are you doing? Come on.
Well, that's so funny. It's so like Fred and Toody's relationship. And what you just described, singing into a answering machine to hear it back, also seems like Fred Cole could have easily have done that too. It's just a practice. Like, yeah, I just got this thing lying around. It's not necessarily the proper way to record something or listen back, but it's convenient. And it's here and it's great, And
I like the way it sounds, so I'm going to keep doing it,
Oh, yeah, totally.
So I think one of the things that kind of one of the things that sort of that resonated between Fred and Toody and us was sort of our approach to doing whatever's whatever is necessary to get the job done, even if you don't have the proper gear or the resources or anything. And we kind of always saw eye to eye on that.
Yeah.
Those. So yeah, the whole answering machine thing. Yeah, totally. I bet at some point Fred definitely sang into an answering machine.
Yes.
Almost certainly.
Yeah. Well, and they've been very encouraging about being, if you're unique or whatever your sound is your sound. Like, when we record, we very much have their way of doing things in our mind. It's like, you can sing something 50 times, but the first 3 or 4 times, that's it. That's how you sound, like it or not.
Well, when was the first time you encountered Fred and Toody? Did you meet them first? Did you see them perform? Were you at Tombstone? What was your entry point?
I'll let Kelly go. Yeah.
I appeared on stage with Fred Cole in about 1973. My first stage appearance. So my father was in a band with Fred back in the early 70s called Albatross.
No way. How come I didn't know this? I feel a fool. That's amazing. Is this before Zipper?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pre-Zipper.
Okay.
And yeah, nothing, there's no evidence of this band's existence aside from a promotional flyer that I own.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. It's got a picture of all of them. It's got, I think it's either their manager or Fred's phone number on it.
Sure.
And it's pretty cool. It was kind of Fred's transition between the Lollipop Shoppe and his kind of branching out to do other things. So my father was in this band, and they used to practice in our basement sometimes, or they'd practice at the music store. And I would hang out to practice. I had a toy drum kit that I would play at their practices. I also had a crappy little plastic guitar, and so I have no memory of performing, but apparently there were a couple times where I got on stage at one of their shows, and I really wish someone had a photo, had pictures of this. But
oh my gosh,
apparently this toddler on stage was a big hit. That sounds awful.
Yeah, I'm surprised he wasn't. All right, you're now Deep Soul Kelly. Like he's gonna figure out a way to like rope you into his past of being Deep Soul Cole.
So my family moved. We moved out of Portland in the mid 70s, and we moved to the coast, and that was kind of it for my father's involvement in the Portland music culture. Fred and Judy used to come down and visit us at the beach. We lived in Cannon Beach for a while, and they'd come down and hang out. And
did they seem different than like your parents?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, their commitment to the music and just sort of living this crazy lifestyle. They had a lot more dedication to that than my parents did. My parents definitely were cool and clued in, but they weren't building log cabins and putting out records and things like that. My father continued to be involved in music, but his tastes went a little more to, he ended up playing a Yamaha DX7 at coastal seafood restaurants and things like that. So it wasn't, he wasn't putting out Zipper records. So.
Yeah, but what a confusing, hard time if you're just like an incredibly talented but regional musician. And I saw the Rats, and you saw that record everywhere. And I just assumed they were huge because every local record store had intermittent signals, their record, and so you just assumed, oh, they're probably big in New York and realizing that it was really a Portland thing.
Yeah.
And kind of getting spoiled in a weird way, like how lucky I was as a kid just seeing the Wipers or the Rats and just being like, yeah, they're playing, like it was great, but it was like sometimes it was hard because you kind of forgot how special they were because they're playing like every 10 days, and you saw them over and over. And now I would give anything to just be like, oh yeah, like if we had that every 10 days would be amazing.
That's kind of the tragedy of the early Portland music scene, is that almost every band was just regional. You had the Wipers and Poison Idea that kind of broke out of that, but not a lot of other bands from the underground scene really did until I guess the 90s. There was a crop of bands that was, kind of touring internationally and releasing records on national and international labels. But you look at all those early bands that are sort of sought after collectible records, and at the time I think they were kind of, no one knew who a band like Sado Nation or the Stiffnoids or
Sure.
Any of those, Ice Nine, or a lot of those other
Yeah.
bands.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because it seems you still the Spurs go over and play Europe quite a bit. And, Dead Moon was so appreciated in this film. A lot of the footage is them playing over in Europe live. Just the love for them, like the just dedication and just the heartfelt emotion about this band was so apparent. Do you still feel like certain countries overseas kind of get something that is harder to tour on over here?
I think it was more of a 80s and 90s phenomenon for the band to have broken in Europe before they were appreciated in America. I don't think that's so much the case anymore. At least that's that's my impression. I think the instant availability of music via the internet has changed a lot of that. So everything's kind of out there for people to get all at once, but it used to be, in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, Dead Moon couldn't draw 10 people in most cities in the States in the early days. And then they'd go to Europe, and their first European tour was 1990, and they were instantly popular. And it was the same with the Wipers. The Wipers didn't do very well in the States.
Yeah, the Miracle Workers had the same thing too.
Yeah, totally. Miracle Workers. That's another great example. Even Poison Idea. I would see Poison Idea went through a period in the late 80s where they were filling up the Pine Street Theater and Starry Night, and they were really big. But then I think their popularity sort of waned at home a little bit.
Oh, I saw them in the basement of a bowling alley on Stark.
Oh, wow.
No one was there. It was really weird. And a fight broke out, and the whole audience went to watch the fight. And there was like four of us standing watching the band, and it was like, this band is like one of the greatest bands of all time.
Yeah. But they were massive in Europe I know their initial first time around 2 European tours in 1990 and I want to say 91 or 92. They were huge, and I know I was corresponding and trading records with a lot of people overseas in that period, and everyone that was at the top of everyone's want list was Poison Idea stuff.
Yeah.
I mailed out so many Poison Idea records. I'd go down to Second Avenue Records every week and pick up, piles of Poison Idea stuff for cheap. And I'd trade it to people in Japan and Europe and get all kinds of cool stuff. And I would have people come and visit me, and we'd go see Poison Idea somewhere like Satyricon or something, and there'd be 20 people there. It was just like, God, how is it the rest of the world knows about these bands? And Dead Moon was a perfect example of that. No one cared in the States until later.
But the impression they made in Europe is huge. I mean, still going over there, people love Dead Moon and love Fred and Toody and Andrew, and just thinking about going back to when our first interactions with them. Like mine was in 2008. I moved to Portland from Bellingham, and all of it for me was really like, I don't want to say random, because I came to Portland with the intention of playing music. I wanted to I skipped over Seattle because I liked Portland's music scene better, and it was just a little further away from home. Seattle was too close. I wanted to go further, and I, was staying with some friends in Northeast off of Buffalo Street in MLK, and my friend comes back to her house, and she's like, "Hey, I went up the street and on Ainsworth, and there are these guys hanging out on the porch, and I just randomly yelled at them if they need a roommate because I was looking for a room." And it was this crazy house. Now thinking about, me and Kelly joke about it, I was like, I don't know if I could move into a house like that now. It was just like kind of chaotic, and like it didn't really feel like people actually lived there. And it wasn't necessarily a party house, but it was just this like
it's kind of one of those classic Portland communal punk houses.
But Keith Bornson was one of the guys living there, and I don't know if you are familiar with him, but he was a drummer in like Hitting Birth and Weaklings and stuff, and he was out on the porch. I came by and did a little tour. My room was like $200. It was like a closet room, but I was like, yeah, I'll take it. This is great. I'm on an adventure. And while we're hanging out, my friend and I are on the porch, and Andrew Loomis walks up, and I don't know about Dead Moon at this point. I don't know anything about anything, and my friend Travis was like, "Oh my God, that was Andrew from Dead Moon." He's freaking out. And I was like, okay, whatever. Right. And then I'm like, "Hey, do you want to play music with me?" That's why I'm here. And he's like, "Yeah, sure." He was fun, but I realized soon that he didn't really want to play music. He just like bopping around town, and we would just go and party, and it didn't take too long to figure that out, that I was a little more serious in my endeavors. But I met a bunch of people with him, and he's charming, and I was 21. I couldn't keep up with him.
Yeah, sure. No one could.
No, but I went to Chin Yin with him, and then he introduced me to everybody at my father's place, and that's how I met Sam, because he's like, "Oh, you really want to play music? Sam's your guy." Like Sam.
Oh, amazing.
And so Andrew introduced me to Sam, and Andrew also, I watched the Dead Moon documentary with Andrew, and not knowing anybody in the movie yet, it's just watching something about this guy's life that I had just met. And I was like, wow, this is cool. Like nothing really had set in yet watching it.
Right.
And the importance of the band and their legacy and their history. And then, I felt like I was like this whirlwind of like, wow, okay, I'm meeting all the people I want to meet. This is a great town. Everybody's a little bit older than me, but that's okay. Yeah. But, I went to see Pierce Arrows at the Tonic, and that's the first time I ever like in real life, saw Fred and Toody and Kelly. And I was starstruck with Kelly. I was just like, wow, this now it's putting these people to life. And not starstruck, I guess, because I didn't know Kelly's history, but just like, he's freaking hot. And he's playing drums, and I got shoved right up front, and I'm like,
this is many years ago.
No, I get
wow,
it.
It's just like everything about them. I was like, this is so cool. They look cool. They look like a band. They're rugged and they're raw. And like, what is this music they're playing? Nobody sounds like them, and everything about it. And I was up front, and it was awkward. I was like right in front of Kelly. And so I just like kept like making faces of like, oh, I'm really awkwardly close to you. Like, hey, hello. And then I wrote them on MySpace later that, all this stuff of like dating, like, but I wrote them on MySpace and just like, hey, we should hang out sometime. And it took a lot of convincing, and eventually, not to have this be a 5-hour interview, but we started dating. We realized we liked each other. He wanted to give it a run to see how I could handle the road, since obviously that's a huge part of their lives. And when I met him and he was playing with Pierce Arrows, they were going over to Europe regularly. We started dating when they were on like a 3-month tour. And so he's even like, oh man, this isn't the time you want to start dating somebody at home. But I came over with them, and we went to the UK, and that was my first like real introduction of just like how worldwide they are and how deep it is and like how meaningful it is to people. And I was like, that was cool. That like made a huge impression on me, and like, this is what I want to do with my life.
It was a trial by fire for her, jumping straight into the deep end of the wacky world of the Coles on tour. And I was used to it because I'd been in a band with them for years by then. And
I didn't know any different though. So,
but yeah, I mean they did every crazy thing that they were ever rumored to have.
oh yeah, the casinos.
Yeah.
Yes.
All the funny stuff.
And in the film, they capture, like, it's a snapshot of time, obviously,
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things about the film is right away, it just looks like Portland.
Yeah.
It's low light. You can smell the moss and the mildew.
Yeah.
And you can just hear like the drizzle of like rain from a badly, fixed gutter. But I feel like the film does a really good job of making it always feel like you can feel like the interior of their house. You can feel what it's like being in the club with them. But it just always reminds me of home. Even when they're playing someplace in Germany, it feels like it could have been swapped out
Yeah.
for like, Tonic, Satyricon,
Yeah.
The Star. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they kind of really embody that, or the Pacific Northwest, it's got a couple big cities too, but
yeah,
it's largely a rural part of the country. And it's a specific kind of rural. It's not the South, it's not swampy and Spanish moss. It's not the Northeast. It's the Pacific Northwest. It's wet, it's rugged, it's wild. It was the last part of the country to have been explored and settled by the, and annexed by the states. So it's its own thing. And I feel like this whole sense of sort of this, frontier spirit is still alive. And I think Fred and Toody, everything they did in real life embodied that. And they couldn't help but, sort of infuse their band with that spirit as well. And I don't think it was an intentional thing at all. It was just the way they were. And that's one of the things I think that resonates with people about Fred and Toody and Dead Moon. There was no pretense. There was no putting on a costume before you played. There was no, sort of adopting a persona. It was just them. That's who they were.
Well, yeah, and the documentary, goes into that too. When they go to one of their fans' house and they don't really speak the same language, but they're getting along. They're getting the point across, and I feel like that is so important, and that's why they have such a deep connection with people. Is because they are real, like Kelly's saying, and they love their fans. They love people. They love playing for people. The fact that people come to their shows, it's important to make those people feel valued.
But as far as the Oregon thing goes, the Portland thing, I think they really embodied that sort of wild spirit that Portland used to have. It seemed like it used to have.
Well, yeah, definitely. Well, and it's funny because they, even as a kid, he at 13 when he's like playing in his first bands and there's a great bonus part in the DVD where he talks about with the band the Barracudas, like going up to a venue and saying, hey, how much do we pay you to play? And they're like, no, we'll pay you to play. And he's like, oh, okay. I guess we have a show. And, he was so excited. He's like, whether they hate us or throw things at us, it's a show. And I just feel like they're both such lifers. And I love just that everything just kind of flowed into another chapter of their life. You have the Lollipop Shoppe, and then you have the Weeds, and the way that like they decide to head up to Canada to avoid the draft because the San Francisco show they've been told they were going to play isn't happening, and they're like getting creeped out by the city. And they run out of gas in Portland, and then they go up to a club, a folk club, and they're like, can we play a show? And the person's like, let me see you play. And then he's like, I want to manage you. And then the volunteer at the club is Toody.
Yeah.
It's magic, their stories, and then how it leads into him being like, I'm tired of bass players. You're going to be my bass player in our
Yeah.
bands now. And she's like, okay, teach me. And they're amazing. Like they have that psychic energy and the way they look at each other knowingly on stage. And I'm sure, being in the middle playing drums, Kelly, I can only imagine feeling that energy go straight through your brain into each other's hearts. It's like, it's so knowing, just the way even in between songs they would, I don't know, you lived it, but I'm just saying as a fan, I just love that everything seemed to be like they were on a continuum.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is the amazing thing about their lives. And I think, if anything, Fred's an excellent example of how it's a combination of commitment to your craft, but also just being open to the universe and letting, being open to things entering your life and rolling with it. I think that was so much of what they accomplished. There was a lot of it that was intentional and that they worked really hard to develop, but there's just this huge serendipitous element to everything that Fred did and touched. Yeah, I mean, it was just a series of accidents, but they were accidents that he embraced and accepted and worked with, so that they became crucial elements to the whole lineage of experiences and things that he built on, to that ended up just being amazing. But they only kind of became parts of that whole the whole story because he went with it. They showed up at the Fillmore West and weren't allowed to play. So instead of just going back to Las Vegas, he was like, okay, well, I guess here's plan B. Let's reroute. Let's just go, go to Portland. And instead of, running out of gas and I don't know, taking a Greyhound home. No, he walked into the folk singer and met Toody and their, I mean, it's just every moment along the way is and the rest is history moment.
Yeah.
And
they didn't let it take them down.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was able to track down that film that he was in with the Lollipop Shoppe.
Oh, the Wild Angels or Angels from Hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you only get to see the guitar, bass player, and drummer. You don't get to see Fred.
I think there's different versions because I saw one somewhere where you could see him. Before I ever saw that movie, I remember Fred and Toody talking about it, and they were like, "Yeah, they didn't want to pay us whatever,
of course,
actors' wages or whatever, so they only showed us from the waist down, and they didn't, just for a second." And I feel like when I saw it, I was like, "No, that's Fred. That's totally Fred." But
okay,
I've seen
still photographs of Fred in it, but yeah. But again, that's just another funny thing of like, hey, we're going to be in a movie now.
Yeah.
And then it's just like,
okay.
But I wanted to ask you, in the film, Andrew Loomis is talking about having to be in a van with Fred, and you've both been in the van with them. He's like, oh, he's like so socially awkward. Like he'll go to, like, Andrew's like, we're trying to get through the borders and keep our head down.
Yeah.
And Fred's like, hey, we're in a rock band.
Oh, my God.
And so was that your experience, Kelly? Like, he's just a big kid.
So I did a ton of international touring before I hooked up with Fred and Toody, right? So I crossed borders hundreds of times. And especially in my earlier tours in the early 90s, before the Schengen agreement between all the European countries really kicked in, and they kind of scrapped a lot of the borders. So every day in those early tours in my punk bands, it was crossing sometimes multiple borders a day. It was stressful. You had to learn how to interact with border guards. There's a very specific way that you have to okay, let's put away the incriminating stuff. We're just tourists.
We don't saying you're in a band.
Let's hide our merch.
We don't have any shirts.
Yeah.
When I joined the band with Fred and Toody, it was like every time we approached the border was the first time they'd ever done this. And Jenny's got a great story about coming back from Canada.
Oh, no. Well, there's the one with all of us coming back. You were there too. Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about when I came back.
No, but you like to.
Oh, yeah. We joke about this all the time with people because, it's fun talking about Fred and Toody stories because people are always just like, what was it like? And there's the one that we always go back to where Kelly's saying like, all right, remember, don't say anything about the show. We're just going home or and just be normal. Just if that's possible, just give them your stuff and let's go. Fred's like, yeah, whatever, I got it. And he pulls up, he's doing pretty good. He gives him all the paperwork. He doesn't say anything. And then the guy's like, are you bringing anything back with you? And Fred's like, only $1 million because we just played a show. And then it all just dissolves from there. And then the guy's like street face, doesn't even like crack a smile. He's like, pull over to the next available parking spot, please. We'll have somebody, and Kelly's just like, what happened?
We're so close.
Only $1 million. The Toody's like,
but it's him.
Surprisingly, we only got turned around at one border, and that was the Macedonian border between Serbia and Macedonia. They just did hilarious things. It was every day. It was something. I remember one time we were driving around. We were in Germany, and we were driving down the street, and the Germans and the Europeans in general, they love classic American cars, right? So they there's car shows, there's car collectors. So we're driving down the street, and at some point, Fred notices a cop car following us. But it's not a German cop car. It's a classic American, like a 70s cop car. American.
Oh, wow.
Actual American.
Right.
And Fred's instincts kick in. He slows down. He gets real careful. And he's sweating bullets. He's freaked out. We're going to get pulled over. I'm like, our roadie, Simone, who's German, we were both like, you realize that's not an actual cop, right? That's not a real cop. He can't pull you over. That's an American cop car. Even if it was a real cop, he has no jurisdiction in Germany.
Right.
Like Smokey and the Bandit back there. I mean, that lasted for half an hour of just mind-numbing. I'm sure the car behind us was some collector, just like, oh my God, why is this American? Why are these guys driving so slow?
Well, it's so funny because I've been in bands too where somebody else is dictating where we're going to eat, how we're going to live on this tour, where we're going to stop. And one of the amazing things that I love that they captured in this film, because how often did they build in, like, we're going to pull over and we're going to do some gambling into their tour?
They try to do it as often as possible.
In the early days, they did it a lot more in the early days. But I was, I have to say, I was probably a little more assertive than Andrew was. Andrew kind of rolled with a lot of things, and I was just like, no, I'm not hanging out in the parking lot for 5 hours.
Oh, in the film, the show ends at like 2.
Oh yeah,
they're at the casino at 3:30 in the morning, and Fred's like, we'll just be here for a while, and then it says like 15 hours later, or it's something like that, and you're like,
yeah, that's
how
real.
Yeah,
are they alive?
Yeah, like one of the first US tours that I went and did merch with them for, me and Kelly were hanging out, and they had a day off. And so we're like, okay, Kelly and I are going to use the van. We're going to go grab food and see. We were in Denver, right?
Yeah,
we were in Denver. And we're like, we're going to go find something to do. And Toody's like, oh, perfect. Okay, yeah, you can drop us off at the casino around 7 and then just pick us up at 11 when you're, And I was like, okay, cool. And I told Kelly, I was like, so we'll go grab some food and we'll pick them up at 11. And he was like, oh, they don't mean like 11. They're not 7 to 11 at night. We dropped them off at 7 at night and went and picked them up at 11 in the morning the next day.
Right.
And I was like, dang.
Yes.
And they came out like happy as clams, like maniacs.
Yeah, it's a very sweet segment in the film.
Yeah, but he,
it was crazy.
Fred would always, you'd be driving by and Kelly would be like, we're getting close to a casino. And Fred would always be like, there's this really good spot to stop. Everybody needs a coffee, right? And he tried to make it seem like it's everybody else's idea. Like, does anybody need to go to the bathroom I know there's a good spot to stop. And we're like,
Yeah, he'd try and sell it. Yeah, it was like, no,
Oh,
well, that's not why we're stopping. We want to stop.
They gave us both $20 once to stop at a casino, and we're like, yeah, whatever, well, fine. And we went in and immediately like lost our $20 in like 5 minutes.
oh, that's my experience. That's where I saw them. I was with a friend who's like, hey, this is where my parents gamble. Let's just go in. And like literally 3 minutes later, I was like, my $20 is gone.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just waiting now. But I in the film, they do say that Fred doesn't suggest, he demands. And, being in a creative project with Fred and Toody, how were those songs created in Pierced Arrows in terms of like, was Fred like, it goes like this? Or did they just start jamming it in front of you and you found your part? Or was he like particular?
Kind of all those things.
Okay.
We all had our limitations as far as our musical abilities. I'm not a drummer. I'm a bass player, and they kind of press ganged me into service as a drummer. And I did the best that I could, and I did get better over the years just through repetition.
Kelly, I just want to interrupt you and say you were killer. And I think it was such a cool choice that they're like, it doesn't matter if you're mostly a bass player. We want you in the band. I think is like, that just shows that you were right for it.
How
it's
crazy
what
they
were.
were.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
It was fun.
It's quite beautiful.
It was great. And that in itself kind of sums up their attitude, because I walked around for the first, couple months after when we started, I was just like kind of shaking my head, like, what the hell? Where'd they get this idea to do this? And a lot of sort of the insiders that I would talk to, people that were friends of theirs for a long time, they're like, oh yeah, that's nothing new. Fred would always, you get a feeling about someone, and then it didn't matter your technical ability. It didn't matter whether you were good at anything. There was some quality that you had to have, and whatever that was, that apparently he saw something in me. And I think it was also the lineage with my father, like, kind of continuing he was, yeah.
Well, not
He was kind of superstitious and into really, tradition and things like that, which was great. And that was just another part of the whole crazy puzzle of Fred Cole. But
yeah,
for the songwriting, we did kind of work around my limitations as a drummer and frankly his limitations as a guitar player. And usually they would work something out between the two of them at home, and then they would bring it to practice and present it to me. And a lot of times, yeah, Fred did have very specific drum parts that he wanted to hear, and he would do his best to pantomime those to me and like, sort of verbalize, okay, I want the cymbals to go like this. And, it was, sometimes it was frustrating, and Fred and I butted heads so much in some of those situations, because I'm pretty stubborn too. And I've got a kind of a, once I get an idea in my head of where I want to go musically or whatever, it's hard to divert me from that path. And I think it's the same with Fred. So you get two people like that in a practice room or a band environment, and it's like, man, the sparks can fly. But we hammered it out, and we'd make it work. And I think what we came up with for the most part was really fun, and it could be interesting.
Well, what about Jenny? I'm assuming you went over to their house many times that they show in the film. I went to Tombstone and I'd been to Wiz Eagles, but I never saw the house. The way they show the house in this film, can you break it down? Because it's so abstract, but beautifully done. it's confusing, but it seems right.
Yeah.
You know, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I mean, Kelly and our house is turning out to be in a similar fashion. I mean, unfortunately, we didn't build ours from the ground up, so it's not 100% personalized like theirs was, or theirs is. I mean, it's cool, and it's not like anything you've seen. I mean, you see it from the outside, and you're already like, wow, this is a crazy place. You know, it's covered in moss, and it's like raw wood, and it's giant, and it's like out in the trees, and you have to drive down this little dirt road to get to it. And then when you walk in, it's like immediate. It's not like, oh, when you go around this corner, this is like where Fred and Toody worked on this stuff. It's as soon as you open the front door, you know, they tiled this like cool black silhouette of like an eagle that says, you know, Cole in tile. And then they have cool stuff everywhere. And then there's all, you know, immediately all these old photos of their history and their past and them young. And so you're just immediately looking all around.
Yeah.
You know, and Fred and Toody have in their bedroom, Fred built a bed. I don't think it's in the documentary.
Oh yeah, they're laying in bed.
Oh yeah, that's right. Sometimes I'm like, were we there or is that in the movie? You know?
Yeah,
But
sure.
It's this giant,
Yes, both.
it's this giant bed that he built. And I just asked Tootie the other day, like, do you still have the bed? She's like, oh yeah, of course. You know, you have to climb up into it. It's tall. And it's just these big wood planks and
Yeah.
everything's handmade, and you just appreciate it more. And if it's funky, if they're like, oh, we made that ourselves, you're just like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. You know, the tiles on the outside of their house are like those like fish, or not tiles, but like
fish scale.
It's
sure.
not tile though, it's
Shingles.
shingles. Yeah, they cut those out themselves, you know.
Handsaw, each one, thousands of them.
It's like, geez.
That was Tootie's job. She'd cut those out. Fred would nail them up.
And I feel like Kelly and I have kind of taken a lot of that stuff in because of just like everything they did in their lives was in order to like keep their music going and their passions going and their crafts going. Like, can you imagine going to like a Rite Aid and seeing Fred behind the cash register? You know, like you're like, no, that wouldn't work. They did everything they could to be themselves. And I feel like that in itself is inspiring. You know, it might not have been perfect stuff, but it's really, really cool.
Even Andrew in the film says, I come back from tour and my mom's like, there's work at the Dairy Queen. And he's like, Mom,
Good job.
I go out for
Classic.
3 months and I make enough, not a lot, but enough to live in Portland at that time.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so true. They are just trying. I mean, obviously the economics of the scene play into it. They say like, you know, we only need, you know, $20,000 to live and do this. And, you know, obviously it's a different world in Portland now, but it just seemed like they were just, you know, whether it was the store or the recording studio.
Master at hustling.
I bought my only guitar at Tombstone and I was so nervous that when they said, do you want to play it? I said, no, I'll just take it. I just took it. I was like, I didn't want to play anything in front of them. I was like, it's a cool looking guitar. I think it's an LS6 Gibson thing. And I was with someone who was like, that's what the guy in the Meat Puppets plays. And I said, cool. And they were literally like, we can plug it in. I'm like, no. And I bought it straight out. And it's the only guitar I have. I love it. But I felt really glad that that's where, you know, they, of course, had curated cool taste.
Yeah.
And they wanted to share stuff with people, too. They didn't seem exclusive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They seemed like they were really happy when people, you know, well, for instance, my employee Todd at the video store, who you know, like he loved them and he was just there with them all this time as a fan, but also he was like close enough to them that he was just felt like, yeah, they're my friends kind of. But it's really, I don't know, it was a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was another thing that I think that resonates with people intuitively. There's zero pretense with those guys.
Yeah.
They were the real deal, and they were self-assured enough to not have to pretend to be anything that they weren't, or to act like snobs to anyone. And that, you know, to me, coming out of the DIY punk scene for so many years, where you can't, even the hint of being a rock star is enough to get you banned from the the culture. It's
Yeah, I just interviewed Red Cross. They were on, and it was like,
Oh,
yeah, that's
nice.
what they were dealing with all the time. Yeah.
yeah. So to become a part of Fred and Tootie's world, it was great to see that, especially to see people who were so I guess I hate to use the word famous, but they were in the garage scene and in the musical world. They were celebrities kind of, and
Absolutely.
but that didn't matter to them at all. It was more important to the first. So yeah, my parents were fairly close to Fred and Tootie back in the early 70s, but when we moved to the beach, we kept maintained contact a little bit, but then through the 80s, there was virtually no contact at all. And I remember growing up having, like a Rats poster on the wall or something at our house in Nehalem, but we didn't really know them anymore. And I knew I'd see Dead Moon or whatever, but I wasn't close to them again until I started playing with them in the band in the 2000s. When I first started playing with them, I remember my first practice out there at Tombstone. I showed up and here's these guys. I knew who Dead Moon was, and I was on like a hey, how's it going basis with them, just from running into them over the years. And I don't know, apparently they knew who I was. But here's this legendary garage rock band. I'm like, man, this is crazy. I'm going out here to play with I thought it was an audition. I actually thought we were just gonna like get together and talk about what we wanted to do. So I pull up out at Tombstone, and Fred's out in the field just covered with grass juice because he's been weed whacking there, so he's out there, he's got the goggles and they're covered in grass clippings, and he's just like, oh, okay, we got a drum kit upstairs. Let me put the weed whacker away and I'll be up there and we'll get started. And I was just like, I was like, wow, this is really so. I mean, I knew they were down to earth, but I mean, they were, if I don't know, if you saw them out of the context of the music scene, they were just the most down to earth, normal, real people. And I think this goes to what you're saying about how people were just friends with them, and you could access them. They were accessible. They were,
yeah.
It didn't matter that Pearl Jam was covering their songs or whatever kind of metric by which you measure fame and infamy and things like that. They were just people, and they're just like us.
Was the pool house filled in when you went out there?
No, the pool house was just full of rainwater and algae. And
yeah, because how you asking, like, what did the house look like? You watch the movie and then you go to the house and it's
mosquito larvae. It was a mosquito hatchery at that point.
Yeah, we didn't get to see we didn't get to see the pool in action, but it is really nice. Like, the first time I saw the movie, watching it with Andrew, no connection with anything. And then I feel like we revisit it every couple of years, and every time we watch it, there's somebody else in the video that we've met since the time we watched it before. Sure. And so I feel like it's this like living organism of like, we got to revisit it because we're going to see something different now that's going to be more meaningful to us now than it was the last time we watched it,
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's so much in there. Like they're, when they renew their vows, and then there's, all the people and after we were playing with Sam for a while, we rewatched that because Sam's driving around on the little go-kart,
Oh God. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. They just show like farmer drummer, and it's like spinning out in a go-kart. And then you're like, it is. Yeah. You're like, oh, there's Steve Turner. And, like everybody's just kind of at this, renewing vow thing. And
knowing that Sam was blind, that, they don't go into that too much. But if you've ever met Sam, knowing that he's blind, zipping around on that thing, that didn't know how to drive.
Yeah.
That is hilarious. I was just going to say, even the fact that they have a pool is like, so Fred and Tootie, at some point, Fred was probably like, we're going to put a pool in. and nobody blinked an eye, and they're just like, yeah, let's do it. Like nobody out in rural Clackamas has a pool, it's out
Yeah.
in the woods. So.
Where it's sunny, where you can have a pool basically, for like a month of the year.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the time, it's just.
But man, their property is perfect,
Yeah, it's cool as hell.
Well, what about recording with them? Because you get a glimpse of it, but it is, a lot of people associate Dead Moon with the way that Fred recorded, straight to like acetate. Is that right? That's not what you would do. You'd cut it.
So they were generally record to 4/8-track, and they had a couple different places that they'd record. One was in a spare bedroom at their house, and they also had a small like studio area at Tombstone, in one of the storefronts. But he would record to tape, but then he'd master from the tape to an acetate on his lathe cutting machine, and that's what they would send to the pressing plant, because that's a step that the plant usually takes. You send your tape in, or your DAT or your CD or whatever, your file, and they have to cut the masters on a lathe. And so Fred wanted to maintain his control over that step and do that himself, and then he'd just send the acetate in. With Pierced Arrows, we never recorded out there. We recorded all of our stuff at studios in town, and there's actually a funny story. Fresh Track Studio, do you remember that one?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Did you guys ever record there?
Death Midget did.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Or the Mystic Records comp.
Oh, nice.
You show up and you're like, they're like, what are you? We're like, we don't know.
that Mystic Records comp where they misspelled everyone's names.
Yeah, we were Death Midgets, Oily Bloody Men, Rancid Bat. It was like, you couldn't, but it was almost perfect. It was like, of course, it's Mystic Records with their horrible pedigree and history to just be like, they got everything wrong. And of course, Poison AD are like, no way we're going to be near this. Yeah. It
was what, the City of Thorns compilation?
Yeah.
I've got that still. So John Lindell at Fresh Tracks, and here we recorded the first Pierced Arrows LP there in 2007, I want to say, maybe early 2008. Well, we recorded the first single there definitely in, I think it would have been spring or summer of 2007. So the funny thing, I was kind of excited when we when I'd heard that we were going to record it at Fresh Tracks, because that's where, I had recorded there, 20 years earlier almost for Deprived, I think was my old band that recorded there. So here's a funny short thing about John Lindell and Fresh Tracks. So I was there in recording in about 1990 or somewhere around then. And we're, I'm kind of looking around. I see these framed pictures of some bands, some old black and white photos of bands on the wall. And I was like, wow, that guy looks like my dad in one of the pictures. And it turns out John Lindell was another one of these guys from the 60s that was in a band with my dad. And he couldn't believe it. John Lindell, the most taciturn, serious guy, was like, that's your dad? Mm-hmm. They were in this band called the Moondogs back in the early 70s, late 60s. So there was a connection there. So that was pretty cool recording there with Fred and Toody, and 20 years later, 18 years later, and with two guys who had been in a band with my dad back in the, 50 years ago.
Did Fred and Toody tell you, like, this is what we want to do differently in Pierced Arrows? Or was it just another step? Like, I get it when I listen to the Rats, Western Front, into Dead Moon and that, but did they make a demarcation line at all with like, we're going to do something, this is how we want to approach this band differently?
Yeah, it's hard because they really, especially at first, they were like, this isn't Dead Moon. We're not just continuing as a different, with a different name and playing the same stuff. I think they wanted kind of a clean break. They had done everything as Dead Moon for so long that they wanted to do something new. And I remember some of the when we first started, it was they said they wanted to do something a little more mellow and sort of country-ish. And since that was so wildly different than anything I had played before, I was like, that sounds great. Let's do it. And we talked about playing some small shows, rural kind of, little open mic night sort of shows at the beginning. And that's why I was really surprised when the first show that they booked, our first show ever, was that, they're like, okay, we got a gig. And I'm thinking, oh, cool, cool. Let's play, some bar in Astoria or something. And they're like, okay, it's Ash Street Saloon with Poison Idea. And
of course,
it just sold out instantly. And I'm like, great.
Yes.
I can't even play these. I can't even play this instrument.
And you're up front too.
Yeah, it was.
You can't hide.
Utterly horrifying. Yeah. So, but I think people inevitably just sound like themselves, especially after having done it for so long, and eventually we just kind of ended up sounding a lot like Dead Moon in a lot of ways. I don't know. I can't be very objective. I know they kind of tried to write some different songs, and I do think we sound differently. And I think
so too.
I think Dead Moon is by far the better band of the two. The songwriting, I think sometimes Fred sort of intentionally deviated from his formula a few times with Pierced Arrows, with mixed results, I think.
Yeah, it's like Dead Moon was probably like the true, pure form of their musicianship, where it's not contrived. Everything is just like, this is who we are, what we do. So then anything else after that, if you're trying not to be that, then it's gonna, ultimately.
Yeah, and I think Fred experimented with some different styles and different tempos and things like that he felt he couldn't really do with Dead Moon.
Yeah, it's interesting because throughout his career, he remained and sounded like Fred Cole. Like, you can't hide the voice. You can't hide the attack of his guitar. But definitely, like, he's like, we're going to get a little more straight ahead here, new wavy with the Rats, and the King Bee. I have a great quote from Mark Stent's book about King Bee, because they're not really mentioned much in the documentary. I don't think they're mentioned at all. But he says, Mark Stent, who played bass with Fred, wrote this book called All Ages, The Rise and Fall of Portland Punk.
Yeah.
And
Stent's our old landlord.
Yeah, of course. He was everyone's landlord.
Yeah.
And but he says Fred was subconsciously anticipating punk when he planned for King Bee to be the rawest of them all. Fred was a primitive on guitar, and he was fearless on stage. He had enough nerve to stand his ground any time the guitar tried to fight back. It was a question of philosophy. He approached music with the same matter-of-fact determination that he brought to everything he did. But then he also said, we were not a fashionable band, and it wasn't our year. And it just seems like Fred was just trying something out. He was like labeling the band punk rock, but they weren't really punk. They were like labeled, I think, Portland's first professional punk rock band, which is very sweet. But he's still finding the genre, and but then you go back to, the Lollipop Shoppe single, and you're like, it's there, it's like a straight line. So I think it's kind of cool that maybe like you said, it wasn't the purest form of it, but I like that he was still, I want to try this, maybe I feel this right now.
And King Bee had some songs that ended up in Dead Moon, playing with Dead Moon. And sometimes I feel like, the songs were there, the idea is there, but it has to do with the bandmates too, and the people involved. And, Fred had some of the Dead Moon songs pre-Dead Moon, but the magic of Toody and Andrew wasn't there. That brought the song to become what those songs were, which is important too. It's interesting, and I think with Pierced Arrows, some of them, it sounds like they were trying to be maybe harder than Dead Moon too. You're saying country, but then you guys were going to cover like a Motorhead song and some other stuff. So it's kind of like, what can we do? Yeah, we sound like us, but it would have been, just.
Yeah, there were songs that sound like Rat songs
Yeah.
that he wrote for Dead Moon. Some of the faster songs.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you mentioned King B, because that was such an interesting turning point for Fred in his songwriting and his music career in general. So King B was the first time that Fred attempted to be a frontman with a guitar. In all of his previous bands, he had just been the singer. And I mean, he tried some singer-songwriter stuff with Nostradamus, but he'd never really taken the guitar that seriously up until King B, when he was on his own. It was just him. There was no lead. Was it Laurie Irk in Zipper? That guy was a shredder.
Right.
So there was no reason for Fred to have played guitar. But then after Zipper split up, Fred would just get restless and want to move in a new direction. And I think with King B, so my personal, I guess, association with King B is that over the years of hanging out with Stan, I had always wondered whether there was any material out there that wasn't on the single. The
Right.
3 songs that were on that single from 1978. And I happened to casually mention that to Sten one day. I was like, God, did you guys ever record anything? And he was like, well, it's funny you should ask. We did record an entire album, but it was destroyed in a fire. And and that was the end of it for then. So fast forward 6 months or 8 months or whatever, and Sten called me. He's like, you know what? That tape that was destroyed, it wasn't destroyed. I found it in a box. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Can I listen to it? Do you mind if I maybe assemble like a King B release of some sort? And so to my surprise, he went along with it, and Toody went along with it. It was totally fine with Sten and Pat and Toody. So it was like the floodgates opened. I had to whittle the LP that I ended up putting out for King B down from probably 8 or 10 hours of material. Just an extraordinary amount of 4-track material that they recorded in the basement of Whiz Eagles, a KBOO session, tons of live material. There's just tons of stuff. But it's interesting because the initial recordings, so they recorded an LP as King B, and it's 70s rock, basically. I think Sten knew about punk rock in 1977. He was clued in.
Yes.
He knew that it existed. He knew what the spirit was, and he was kind of trying to go in that direction. He was kind of pushed Fred in that direction a little bit. So Sten was sort of the architect of that end of things back then. Fred knew he wanted to move in a different direction than he had previously played, but he didn't really, it wasn't fully formed. So that first LP session, there's something like 12 songs, and they're all over the place. I mean, there's songs on there that sound like the Doors. There's it's just kind of 70s rock stuff. It's excellent shit, but it's kind of all over the place stylistically. And then the watershed moment when the Ramones played the Paramount.
Right.
That is it. That's the ground zero for Portland punk. And as legend has it, which is true, it's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and Mink DeVille and the Ramones were on tour together. And for whatever reason, Mink DeVille dropped off of the show at the Paramount. And the promoter called around looking for an opening band. He called Captain Whiz Eagles Music, Fred Cole's music store, to see if Fred had any suggestions for an opener. And of course, Fred was like, well, I've got a band.
A punk rock band.
Yeah, so they played, and by all accounts, Fred was just wrapped. Just when the Ramones played, boy, that was it. He knew. I don't think he'd ever heard anything like it. And the way Sten and Pat Connors, the drummer for King Bee, they both described Fred as basically sitting there the whole time, open mouth in astonishment at the Ramones and what they were doing. And at that point, that's when King Bee changed course abruptly. And
amazing.
That's why that album never came out, because at that point Fred was like, nope, we're a punk band. And so all their stuff, they started writing songs with kind of obnoxious lyrics. They wrote there were some political elements in there. A lot of that post Ramones show period, King Bee sounds like kind of a more primitive Rats, if you can imagine a more primitive sounding Rats.
Yeah, well, I saw them plenty of times I could. I mean, it was funny seeing the Rats too, because they were older, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, Fred and Sten turned 30 in 1978, so they were of a different generation.
Right. So if you're going to see Poison Idea, who seemed older to me because they were just 2 years older than me or 3 years older, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like seeing them was like my eyes had to adjust. And I think at first I was kind of judgy because it was like I didn't know who they were or their lineage.
Yeah.
Oh my God, they were so good live and omnipresent because there were just so few bands to go around. So it was like any touring band, which was, few and far between back then. It was like, it was always, Poison Idea or the Rats or Sado Nation playing. In the film, it's very sweet. They show their pre-show ritual, the handshake and the kind of like the mindset they get into. Have you ever had a pre-show ritual? Or, I have to ask, it's one of the questions, because in movies that aren't real, that are narrative films, every single band is backstage and be like, all right, tonight's the night. Everyone get in here. All right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you have anything like that?
My pre-show ritual is just frantically running around, making sure Christopher, our guitar player, knows that it's time to get on stage, trying to find whoever's out smoking. It's like, okay, we're on in 5 minutes. Every show you'll see me running around. Who's in the bar? Okay, you guys, we gotta play.
Right.
I do like to have like a shot before we play. I have the things I like to do, but it isn't like we're not like huddling and group hug or anything like that. Mine's like, get your shit out there. Let's go.
With Fred and Toody, everything was a ritual. That's the thing. They were exaggerated. They were an exaggerated example of all of that stuff. We don't have anything like that in the Spurs, and it would be kind of corny if we did, but it made sense with Fred and Toody.
Yeah.
Early in Pierce Arrows, Dead Moon had the huddle, right? They would huddle and give each other a group hug, and that was their thing. In Pierced Arrows, it was different. Toody early on had these jewelers make each of us a ring, a Pierced Arrows ring, and before every show, we'd fist bump with those rings and touch.
So killer.
And Fred, every show, Fred would he just being goofy. It was a joke kind of. He'd say ring power.
Yeah.
He wasn't. He was just being funny, but that's what we did every night. But for them, everything was a ritual. There were so many weird superstitions that we had.
Yeah, the one was it Jason that figured that out about the ashtray?
Yeah, I think it was Jason Summers from
the documentary,
who made the documentary, talks about accidentally cleaning out the ashtray in the van.
Because this thing it'd get full. There'd be 1,000 cigarettes in this ashtray, and it'd just be like every time you turn a corner, ashes were.
Oh, they were chain smokers, in the van. They had to fill that sucker up, and it was just a mound of cigarette butts. And Jason Summers at one point emptied it, and Fred and Toody couldn't believe that. It was almost like the world was gonna, tilt from its axis. It was, that's bad luck, that's bad juju. But they had a ritual for almost everything. And one thing that always used to drive me crazy is before we played, they would go out on stage and, the crowd would be freaking out as soon as those guys, got on stage. And they would just turn around and face their amps, and they had these little analog tuners on top of their amp, and they'd plug into that and they'd plink around on their guitars, getting them in tune. And sometimes it would take a while because these are old vintage instruments that they had. And it used to kind of drive me nuts in a way, because I was like, man, you guys are, it's a real like anticlimax. You guys come out, we should come out strong. We should just get up on stage and just kick into it. And you guys get out there and everyone's cheering, and then you just kind of mess around on your thing. And both of them were like, no, we got to do, that's part of it. That's part of the ritual. That's the tradition. That's what we got to do. And it, as annoying as it was at the time, it was like, okay, I get it. That's, everything that
routine.
Everything was routine.
Well, is there anything that you wish had been captured in this documentary that is missing?
One thing I don't think it goes into is just how much they have supported, and when they play with other bands, how much they support the bands they played with. I think that's something that people don't realize unless they've seen a show or played with them from another band. You're playing first or second, and Fred and Toody were out there watching you, which that's pretty cool. And that kind of goes back to what we were saying of just, just being real and not having any pretenses, or, they're part of the show and they want to support the other people that are doing the things that they have been doing their whole lives.
Yeah, I mean, you got to hand it to them. Their endurance is incredible. We played, at hundreds and hundreds of shows all over the place. And some of the opening bands that we played with, they were, some of them were pretty bad at times. That's inevitable. I've been in bad bands that have opened for bands.
I don't think the documentary is missing that necessarily, but just as a perspective of something about them that is cool.
But it was amazing because no matter how bad the band was, there was Fred and Toody right up front, watching the whole set and thanking the band for playing and congratulating the band and all, oh, that was great, you guys were great, just this encouragement. I mean, just being there watching a band was encouraging, but on top of that, they would congratulate the band and thank them, and it was great. Like, I personally, I can't do it every night. Like, it's noisy, it's loud. I have to, I try and watch the bands, but I can't even sit through an entire set of some of my favorite bands at this point.
Yeah. Well, everyone's so different. Like, I like to be at the merch table because I see the club fill in. I kind of know what's going to happen. You know, I'm not surprised. And time moves faster for me than sitting backstage and waiting.
Yeah.
But everyone's so different. And it's so funny. You mentioned the kindness of Fred and Toody watching a band. Mike Watt is the same way. I remember our band opening for him for Firehose in '91, and he was front and center.
That's great.
No one had showed up at the show yet because it was like no one knew who we were. But he's there, and afterwards he's like, "Oh, you guys are great. Oh, what are you doing? Like, are you going to record?" And you're like, "It's Mike fucking Watt." It's
That's
just
awesome.
It's so sweet, but it's so baked into Mike. It's not a put on.
Yeah.
It's genuine. And even if he might have been like, this is not my favorite band, he saw that we were trying. It's what we wanted to do. We were in love with music. We wanted to be in a band.
Yeah.
And, it's like, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So.
Just leading by example of, I like all of the things, but I think Jason and Kate did a really wonderful job of like capturing most of all the essence of the Cole world and what it was at that point in time, and still continues to be. Without Fred and Andrew, Toody is still very much the same person that was in that documentary, and she's still working on how, we go out there and she's chucking wood into the back of a truck, cleaning up the property, and just it's cool. And it's cool to see them at that point. And Toody obviously genuinely loved the music and what they were doing as well, because she's still doing it even without them. So it's not like, okay, it's my husband, I'm just going to do this to placate him and this is what he wants me to do or whatever. Like it's true. They're true lifers of rock and roll and music. Kelly and Christopher are playing with her now, and
she rules, and she's like as big a focal point as and important as Fred was. You know what I mean? Like she like has been around playing in Portland for so long.
Yeah.
It was like,
Yeah.
and she fucking rules. You know what I mean? I love the way, I loved when she sang lead, but I also loved the way that this was not a band of harmonies. It was like they sang the same vocal line. And I loved the sound of their voices together. Oh, it's so killer. It's just like so full of energy and force.
In the documentary, they talk about the Yukon and their trip up to Canada. Toody just revisited that, or tried to revisit that spot on her own. And she did a trip over this summer.
Oh yeah, she drove up to the Yukon in her
Subaru.
The old Subaru up the Alcan Highway.
Volkswagen, I guess.
All the way up. Yeah, although she said that the place, so they tried to homestead outside of Whitehorse in the Yukon, which at the time was just kind of a little outpost, a few streets. It was just a little community. Apparently it's grown. And she said that the spot where they had their cabin has sort of been consumed by the suburban sprawl of Whitehorse, which something that didn't exist 50 years ago, but it's gone now. She couldn't find the exact spot because it's just all of housing developments out there. But I think it's incredible that she's going to be 76 in like 2 weeks, and I just went to Mexico City with her 2 weeks ago and played a festival down there. It's great. She's, and it's excellent to see her do this stuff and realize that people are just as interested in seeing her as they were seeing her play with Fred. Because sometimes I do think Fred kind of took the limelight in a lot of ways, not intentionally, but it's just the way, he was the principal songwriter and all this
longer musical history,
and so people had a tendency to kind of focus on Fred. And I don't know, it's great to see her getting her due, because she's so talented, and so it's just got such a great spirit. And God, she's still at it.
Yeah, just important for women in the music scene as well, and just seeing that you can still do it even as you're getting older. I mean, she didn't even start playing. Toody will tell you that her greatest years didn't even come until her 40s.
They say in the film, there's no salvation in turning 40.
Yeah,
it's like, and we're so beyond that. It's like, okay,
yeah. Now she's still playing at 76, so it's kind of like when you might feel like at 40 or 50 you've aged out already and you better hang the towel. It's like, well, no, maybe you haven't even got started yet.
Well, that's actually an important thing for me personally with playing with Fred and Toody. When I hooked up with them in the band, I was probably 36, so I was in my mid 30s, and in the punk scene, in a lot of ways, you're kind of almost ready to be put out to pasture at that age. And I was feeling it. I was feeling a lot of, in the DIY punk scene, the median age is early 20s, and I was kind of this old guy, and I was still living in a communal house. And
if you feel weird going to a house show, you're like, uh-oh. No.
Yeah, and it was just, I'd always tried to do things kind of on my own terms and all of that. But there was maybe not some doubt creeping in, but there was sort of this feeling of like, wow, I might have to grow up at some point. And then I started playing with Fred and Toody, and I'm like, these people are older than my parents by a couple of years.
The never land of
they're
music.
Still doing it. And it was one of the most inspirational, encouraging things. It was this thing, and this point in my life where I was like, you know what? You can do this all your life. You can do this.
Yes.
I guess I'd always wanted to do this all my life, and I had always worked to put myself in that position. But until you actually, for me personally, I guess until I actually saw someone else doing it and doing it well and doing it with a good set of ethics, and just doing it with class.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, this is great. This is perfect. This is where I see myself in my 70s if I make it that long.
Yeah. got to the position where you know, we're at that point where everything we do is in support of the music. So it's a hustle, but it's something that we enjoy to do. And luckily, you know, those early years proved that we are a good match in our music endeavors, and we have the same, you know, goals and everything. So
Yeah, I mean it's not easy being in a band with a couple, and it's not easy being a couple in a band. I've done both with disastrous results, and
Right.
you know, it took some convincing for me to, you know, do a band with Jenny from the first place, because I had a horrible experience with a girlfriend in a band back in the 90s. I was like, God, this just horrible. This doesn't work for me or anyone around us. And, you know, I'd been before Jenny and I got together, and before we had our band, I had spent, you know, several years on tour with Fred and Toody, and being in a 3-piece where the other 2 people are married to each other, you're always kind of a fifth wheel. But just seeing the way they interacted with each other was like, okay, so this is a positive example of how that works. This is how you can get to a place in your relationship where you can be in a band together. And you know, being on tour with people, it's difficult at the best at times. Add to that any weirdness in your relationship, or any kind of competitiveness, or if you just don't get along or whatever, it's just amplified. And, you know, of course, like any humans, Fred and Toody would have their moments on tour where they didn't see eye to eye about something. And I had those moments with both of them, and the 3 of us had those moments.
with me, no, I'm kidding.
But it's you know, we really worked, and they loved each other, and it was great. And so when the time came for us to do what we do, it's kind of like, okay, let's, you know, it can work, and let's try and make it work. I would like to talk briefly about Jason and Kate from Magic Umbrella. They did a great job. So I met them for the first time in I think it was 2001, when they were filming the documentary. They were on tour with Dead Moon, and I was living in South Germany at the time. I was living in a small town called Ludwigsburg outside of Stuttgart. And Dead Moon was playing at a club in Stuttgart, and I went in to see him. And Jason and Kate were walking around the parking lot out in front of the show, interviewing people. And that's how I met them. And we kind of stayed in contact over the years. And then when I started playing with Fred and Toody, we would stay at their property in North Carolina outside of Chapel Hill. And over the years, I you know, we got pretty close, and I would consider Jason and Kate like just great friends. They're really cool people, and they did a fantastic job on the documentary. And they're, you know, we used to stay out there with them. They've got an old farmhouse with a big old dusty barn, and we filmed a music video out there. Mm-hmm. They're just really cool people, and they're part of the whole Dead Moon Pierced Arrows family. And if you, I also want to mention that they had tons of extra footage.
Yeah.
That they've recently released.
So there's like a part 2 of this documentary now.
Yeah, full of great live footage and behind the scenes interactions with Dead Moon and their, you know, the crazy hangers on. And yeah, it's just great.
It seems like they did a really great job of also getting their trust right away, but also standing back and not being like, their personalities are not in this film. You know what I mean? You don't get a sense of who the people who made this film are.
Yeah.
They're just being they're capturing what they need to capture and being respectful.
It's like what you do with wild animals, right? Where they're just like, you just witness, you don't interfere.
Right. Yeah. Don't help. If you see Dead Moon caught in a trap, don't help them. Yeah,
just let nature take its course. You know, it's the way it's supposed to.
Won't handle it. Just let
him gnaw his own arm off.
Oh, it's great. I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show. It's been so good to see you. You guys rule. I'm going to put information in the show notes, with like where people can find out about the latest album and the tour dates. You guys are constantly on tour.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah. But again,
Yeah,
what else are you going to do? Right.
Yeah.
It's who you are. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I see it. So at the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what we're talking about. So on a scale from 54 being the lowest
40.
and 40 being the highest, how many melted candles shoved into a Jack Daniels bottle in the front of a drum set over the course of time do you give Unknown Passage to Dead Moon Story? 54 candles to 40 candles.
If 40 is the highest, I would go with 40 because it's an excellent document. It really shows who Fred and Toody are and where they come from as people, and it's a great one of my favorite music documentaries of all time.
Yeah, definitely. It's a perfect capture of just a really cool whole universe. There's so much it covers so much in a band that's hard to cover everything, but they have such a vast history and yeah, it's wonderful. And if you weren't familiar with who they are, you can watch it and really feel a connection, and then when you listen to it, you'll have a great visualization of what you're listening to.
And I think it really opened up Dead Moon to a whole new crowd as well. I think their popularity with entire different demographics within the music culture really increased after that movie came out. I think Jason and Kate did a great job.
That's amazing. I mean, that's all you want, is to be able to turn people on to something that they may not be familiar with, or have it be the perfect way to tell someone's story if you are overly familiar with them. And they kind of have done both here. I want to say also, I have written down here, 40 is the right answer. 40 candles shoved into that Jack Daniels bottle is definitely the right answer for this film. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. It's so good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for including us on this. This is wonderful.
Oh, total honor. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
All right, we'll see you around.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye.